CEO Lives Matter. This is the rallying cry you're hearing from politicians, the media, and executives around the world in the wake of the assassination of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. These people want to distance themselves completely from the death and destruction that their policies and jobs create. So, of course, the pearl-clutching elite need their proverbial punching bag to tamp down on the class warfare bubbling beneath the surface. And that person of late is Taylor Lorenz.
There is something deeper, a sickness that is going on in our political class, best exemplified by the absolute nut job, Taylor Lorenz.
Moving on to the assassination of a CEO who ran a health insurance company in America. And the disturbing and brazen attack in New York City was caught on camera. But one journalist refused to dance around the issue and instead blatantly advocated for the death of insurance executives. Former Washington Post reporter Taylor Lorenz wrote this: "Why we wanted insurance executives dead."
Former Washington Post reporter, you won't believe this, Taylor Lorenz called Thompson's murder joyful.
This guy's a husband, he's a father, and he's being gunned down in the middle of Manhattan. Why does that make you joyful?
Thousands of Americans that he murdered. So are the tens of thousands of Americans, innocent Americans, who died because greedy health insurance executives like this one push policies of denying care to the most vulnerable people.
Taylor Lorenz, journalist at User Mag, author of Extremely Online. Thank you so much for joining me on the Empire Files.
Thanks for having me.
So, Taylor, there's been a tidal wave of takes against you for your recent, what you said recently about this, for saying, quote, "and people wonder why we want these executives dead," basically in bad faith, pretending that you, as well as the entire left at large, I guess, are advocating for political violence. What's your response?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny, especially when liberals get mad and stuff like this, because they're the ones that have been saying, they wish Trump would croak and all this stuff for years. I mean, I think you can wish that people didn't exist or were dead, unfortunately. And that doesn't mean that you are advocating murdering them.
I mean, how dare you celebrate or laugh at the death of a millionaire who's presiding as judge, jury, and executioner of the working class? I mean, this guy, you're telling me that these people don't laugh at the death of the poor en masse to enrich their stock portfolios? I mean, the poor who die because of the bureaucratic decisions of these capitalists.
Absolutely. And look at the deaths look at the murders that are celebrated constantly, by the way, in the US. We have people like Kyle Rittenhouse, other vigilante sort of people that have committed murders against innocent citizens, and they're lauded. So it's just the response to all of this has just been so absolutely ridiculous. This is also a country that celebrates death constantly. And it's just, it's our barbaric system. And it's very, I think, silly that people are manufacturing outrage around that comment. Oh, the poor CEO, and our hearts are out to him. And gosh, even when a CEO can't even be safe in America, and that's just not the vibe of the country. It has not been the vibe of the country for a long time.
It is so funny because it's one of those culturally significant moments that has just taken over the zeitgeist of the country. And there's several moments like this. I mean, the Gaza genocide, obviously, Medicare for all under Bernie. And Americans overwhelmingly feel a certain way about these issues, but we're being gaslit, especially by the corporate media and the political establishment that look at you. I mean, there's just guest after guest on these networks telling Americans how insane they are for feeling a certain way about this. And I think it's really fascinating because there's just several key things that, they're trying to manufacture something that just can't click for them because the genie's out of the bottle and there's no way to put it back in.
Yeah. I mean, healthcare is something, especially in these barbaric insurance systems, or something that affect millions of people in the most direct and personal ways, right? These insurance companies murder people's friends, family members. We all have direct experience with this system. So when you have some multimillionaire media, personality come on cable news and try to start scolding people, it just doesn't resonate. And I think that the media is really flailing and they're lashing out right now because they know that they're losing their ability to control the narrative. And it actually makes things worse. As I've talked about on these networks. Like, when you treat the American public like that, all you're doing is radicalizing people further against you. And for these people that claim to really want people to work within the system, well, you're basically saying fuck you to these people, and you're actively alienating them and speaking down to them and scolding them. So that is not a way to, build solidarity.
I mean, you just see a contingent of like people who are empathizing with Brian Thompson and empathizing with CEOs and executives and justifying all this new security measures that they're going to be taken. I haven't seen one story of a family that went into medical debt or bankruptcy or lost someone because of the denial of coverage.
Yeah, I mean, I think ProPublica has done an amazing job, a great nonprofit newsroom. But when you look at sort of corporate media and these billionaire-owned outlets, like they don't center the interests of the working class. They center the interests of their readers, who are primarily, upper class, upper middle class executives or aspiring executives, and that's who they speak to. And they sort of exist to prop up corporate power. So you're not hearing, tearful stories from people that have lost loved ones because of the actions of people like Brian Thompson. You're just hearing other CEOs and crisis comms people out there, boosting their narratives.
Let's talk a little bit about United Healthcare and how just bad it is. I mean, especially compared to its competitors in this kind of ruthless for-profit healthcare system that we live in. I mean, talk about how their model works.
These companies exist to ration care and to deny care. And United is the worst of all of them. They deny significantly more, double the industry average of claims. But essentially, if you run these, this healthcare system as a for-profit enterprise, and you have people paying in every single month, theoretically to get care, it's in these companies' best interest to provide as little care as possible, again, to maximize their profits. Ultimately, their goal is to increase value for shareholders, not to facilitate a healthy and happy consumer base. So, United is just among the worst because they are sort of the most ruthless about this. They deployed these AI systems that sort of deny claims en masse. There was one AI that was, I think, denying 90% of claims that the executives knew was flawed, and they continue to roll it out. And when you deny claims, you deny people life-saving healthcare.
Exactly. I mean, and it's just so sinister, this AI system that Brian Thompson actually personally introduced, implemented. I mean, the 90% error rate, that's astounding. And to knowingly deploy the system with a 90% error rate, and then just another kind of level of unaccountability, right? Another way to just kind of wash your hands of responsibility by being like, oh, well, it's not me deciding whether someone lives or dies. It's the AI. And so it's on that. I mean, it's
like being like, it's
disgusting.
Not me that decided someone should die. It's the gun that I was using.
Right.
The AI is not a sentient thing. It's a system, and you're using it to deploy death and suffering.
The person who's like overseeing a lot of AI right now, when you look at the AI systems killing Palestinians en masse in Gaza, Peter Thiel, who's another big winner of the Trump victory, he was recently asked, I think it was on Piers Morgan, about what he thought of the outpouring of support for Luigi Mangione, and his response was startling. I mean, he literally was speechless.
And to those who think this shooter is a hero, because he did it because he said this healthcare executive was presiding over a healthcare system which kills thousands of Americans by denying them cover. What would you say to them?
I don't know what to say.
The ruling class is terrified. They don't want the gallows to come on their doorstep next.
Yeah, they're definitely aware. And I think that's why you see them cracking down. And that's why you see them going out in the media and pushing this, like, sort of pearl clutching narrative. Like, oh, guys, like, you can't just say that you hate CEOs. Like, I was on TV the other day and the woman's just like, you can't just say, people, it's okay for people to hate CEOs. It's like, why?
Well, especially this guy. It's like the for-profit healthcare industry is
like
one of the most evil.
we're not hating CEOs of the local flower shop here. Like we're not like we're hating the CEO of a barbaric business, a business that relies on denying care to people to make a profit.
I mean, here's where it really comes down to. There's two classes, right? The class at the top that never really feels the pain of the working class. And that's why the symbolism of this outpouring of support for someone like Luigi is so profound, because he's simply a vessel for the rage, right, of the system. It's the only way that people can really express themselves, because they've been beaten down so much that they're in debt. They've lost people. And that class that dominates the rest of them has never been scared. They've never felt that wrath before, and they've never been terrified running for their lives. And so this exposes the possibility of class warfare. You know, the millionaires who benefit off this private insurance industry, the millionaires who never have to worry about dying from lack of medical coverage or going bankrupt and into debt from lack of medical coverage. Those are the people that will never have to worry about these problems,
Yeah, exactly. They're completely insulated. And not only do they will never have to worry about that sort of thing, like any sort of healthcare issues or access to care, whatever. They can't even take people saying mean things about them online. Like they can't even take people criticizing them. They're so thin-skinned and fragile, and it's just pitiful.
I think what really gets me, I mean, there's so many like hypocritical double standards going on, but I think the thing that really just irks me the most is all the people hand-wringing about how we should think and feel about the assassination of Brian Thompson are the same people who have been manufacturing consent for the mass murder of Palestinians for over a year, Taylor. So like on one hand, like you said, I mean, this country is born and bred on genocide and slavery and war. I mean, and look at what we're doing today. It's just constant bloodletting warfare. We're the world's largest, most militaristic empire. I mean, signing off for genocide, signing off on apartheid, signing off on just endless war in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because ultimately they don't value those people's lives, right? And we even just saw this with the juxtaposition of how these people are covering Jordan Neely and his death, and whose deaths are deemed acceptable in society, whether in America or abroad. And it's ultimately, especially in halls of political power and the media and stuff, it's like, if you are a vulnerable, poor, disabled, or, marginalized person, or you live in somewhere like Palestine, and you're murdered, that's considered an acceptable loss. They don't care. But if you are rich and powerful, oh gosh, then it's like a national scandal.
I mean, I just saw Cory Booker posing with Yoav Gallant, who's a wanted fugitive. Like he's an internationally wanted war criminal by the ICC. And Cory Booker, who is a self-proclaimed progressive Democrat, smiling ear to ear with him in his office with a portrait of Frederick Douglass in the background. I'm just like, what the hell reality? Are we living in this far into a genocide, and you can just gleefully on one hand talk about land acknowledgement and gun violence against Sandy Hook children, and then on the other hand, it's like, this man is responsible for tens of thousands of murdered Palestinian kids. I mean, what's going on?
That's appalling and so disturbing, but it also just shows, look, we know where the politicians in this country, where their allegiances lie. And it's just, ultimately, it is not with average hardworking Americans. It's with people in power, people in political power, the way that they sort of frame certain countries that are our allies as sort of infallible, and then other countries as aggressors. It's just like the whole thing is just a farce. And that's very wild to me that he would have that guy in his office, because isn't he supposed to be arrested?
Right. It's like, put some handcuffs on him. I mean, unless you're like,
I don't know enough about how that works, but I'm like,
right.
Would you do a citizen's arrest or something?
Right. Like, what's going on? No, I mean, it's so fascinating, especially when you're looking at the swath of corporate media and the manufacturing of consent for these policies, America's foreign policy around the world. I mean, look, you have worked at the Washington Post, the New York Times, and you come from like the world of citizen journalism. So you have a really interesting background. But I guess taking a step back and kind of looking at the consent that's been manufactured for over a year when it comes to the genocide in Palestine. I mean, how do you explain that editorial line and these papers being some of the worst offenders when it comes to this egregious bias?
Yeah, it's disgusting. I think the bias is just sickening. I think, it's important to make a distinction between certain people at these sorts of organizations. I think the leadership of the traditional media industry is not aligned with the working class, right? These are billionaire-owned media outlets, largely with editors in positions of power that they all share a very specific ideology, and it's a sort of center-right ideology, if not a right-wing ideology. And it informs the view of the media. Like it just does. Like there's no such thing as quote unquote like objective journalism, right? Every single decision you make is an editorial choice when you put together coverage of a story. And I think it's really hard. And there are just things that you are not allowed to say if you want to work in corporate media. And I think that that's a huge loss. I mean, one thing that I loved when I started out as a blogger is the ability to speak truth to power. I blew up shitting on all of these media organizations. And as a millennial, I kind of came of age like in the 2010s when I was a young reporter, and you had these outlets like Vice News or BuzzFeed News. Then that whole sort of business model fell away because those were venture-backed companies, which was always a terrible business model. They all like fell apart. And then some of us just got sucked up into like traditional corporate media. But the problem is like this sort of top-down mandates from all of traditional media is one of it's a deference to power, right? It's like you can't go too far. You can't say too much because then that makes you a quote unquote activist. But you can advocate as much as you want for right-wing positions. It's just if you advocate for left-wing positions, then you're an activist. And it's just very broken. And I found it very hypocritical. And this is always something I criticize the media for, but especially working in establishment media, I just think it's a farce. I wish they would just let people say what they mean and, stop centering the, voices of the most powerful people. But it's like, then there are these journalists that do incredible accountability journalism. Like there are people like David Enrich at the New York Times, phenomenal investigative reporter, business reporter, who has exposed just like the evils of like companies like Johnson & Johnson and like, the way that like the healthcare industry and the legal industries of like are corrupt, right? But they sort of allow some of those people to do those things, right? Mm-hmm. But the overall posture of the paper is never going to center those stories, right? Like the overall, like the goal of a place like the New York Times or others, right, is to sort of, it's a business, right? It's a for-profit business and it's largely built on prestige and appealing to sort of elites, I guess, in society and not centering the working class. And I just think this is a problem with our billionaire-owned media ecosystem. And this is why I'm a huge defender of independent media.
Well, exactly. I mean, I always say don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, there's amazing, intrepid journalists working at every one of these institutions.
Of course,
you just have to seek them out and follow their work. James Risen, at the New York Times, or previously at the New York Times, he was one of my journalistic heroes. But yes, there is a problem with the top-down editorial line and dictates being driven by the billionaire, the ruling class, because at the end of the day, like you said, it's a for-profit business model that's subsidized by the very corporations that are part of the problem. Banks, oil companies, especially when you're looking at defense contractors, something like General Electric, which is one of the top 5 big corporate media giants that owns a lot of other media conglomerates. So it's a huge problem when you're not only owned by one of the defense contractors, but you're certainly subsidized by them, and your advertising relies on not just them, but a lot of these other problematic corporations. Not to take away from the incredible journalism that people are doing on the ground, but it is really hard, and it gets increasingly hard to fairly cover grassroots struggles, especially when those struggles contradict the bottom line of these networks.
Yes. And I think it's a shame because they sort of use that good journalism as cover for this sort of broader editorial slant that is pro-power, pro-capitalism, right? Like that is the broader editorial slant. It's like, yes, we'll let you guys do these little, these critical stories here, but fundamentally, we're never going to challenge the system. And I think that is a problem. And that again, this is why I think we need a diverse media ecosystem and why I'm a huge supporter of independent journalism.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to foreign policy, it does seem like there's no diversity of thought at all. It is very uniform.
I'm from like the tech beat, and it's a little different. But no, that type and the national security. I know I have friends that are in that world, and that's sort of.
It's kind of like you have to be true believers, right? You have to be Zionist. You have to be imperialist. You have to be a true believer in the system. You have to be a good old capitalist, and that I think that's the problem. Is it's like you can't even express your opinion. Well, it's not even that you're stymied. I mean, I'm sure people are, and I'm sure their opinions have changed and are more nuanced than that. But I think you don't even get to the position where you're a foreign policy journalist at the Washington Post unless you do think in a certain way and kind of align with that editorial line. And so it just
it's just so hard because, again, there are these like brilliant journalists that are stuck working in these systems. Like, I mean, I just think of, again, like people like Evan, other colleagues of mine at the Post that just like, I know their beliefs, like we are friends, but, and I've talked to them about working in corporate media. A lot of them also worked at places like the New York Times, the Journal, like you sort of, there's only so many places to work, right? There's like fewer and fewer. And some of the work that they do, especially the investigative stuff, like it requires levels of resources where they can't just go to Substack, right? It's very hard for them to do this sort of reporting independently. And then you see other places like The Intercept or others that have emerged just sort of like in that digital media world, but the business model struggles there too. So there's just not a really sustainable business model for journalism that challenges power and allows some of these journalists to do the stories in the way that they really would want to do it if they were independent.
And especially like allowing the resources or cultivating the resources for investigative journalism. I mean, that is so non-existent because we're living in this hyper-capitalist model where the algorithm's driving everything. It has to be hyper-sensationalist, more sensationalist than the next person, and driven by that 24-hour news cycle. So there's several factors that are like impeding actual, critical thinking, investigations. We're in a bad way, basically, when we're looking at the future of news delivery and truth telling, Taylor.
Yeah, it's not good. I mean, this is what I wrote my book about, and I've been covering for years because I cover internet culture, but also the rise of the content creator industry, for lack of a better word, which is really just independent media. And I mean, some things make me really hopeful, like the fact that it's easier than ever to kind of monetize. You can build a business better today than 10 years ago. But I just think the internet is more and more controlled. And again, we are losing civil liberties every single day online. Speech is being controlled online. These platforms are corrupt, and we need more people challenging power. And it's hard to do. It's hard to do when you're in traditional media and you can't speak out on the things that you want to speak out about.
Well, that's what's so amazing about, liberals calling for censorship, especially on the heels of something like Russiagate, where it's just siloing themselves off into oblivion and basically not wanting to see, Trump supporters online, not wanting to see people with different opinions. They'd rather just insulate themselves. And I just think that's a really dangerous kind of road to go down because these people exist, right? And we need to hear what they have to say so we can figure out how to deal with the problems in our society that are systemic instead of just pretending la-di-da, putting our fingers in our ears and just pretending like, no, none of this is our problem. We don't want to hear it. We don't want to see it.
Yeah, exactly. But it is scary though, still, how much of the sort of social media landscape is controlled by powerful billionaires, right? Like we don't have a real great sort of distributed way to get out information. Like even platforms like Rumble that are controlled by Peter Thiel, or YouTube, which I'm on, but it's still controlled by this like powerful tech company. And so I think that's why it's really important to have more direct ways to connect with each other online that are just outside the realms of sort of the control of these billionaire-owned platforms, which will always censor speech in one way or another.
It's crazy that it's been like a politicized and a partisan lens, that somehow conservatives are the victims of, this totalitarianism by the liberal establishment, and that they're the victims and they're the ones who can't have free speech. I mean, it's just an inverse of reality, because like, as you've pointed out, this is a bipartisan effort to stymie and suppress free speech across the board.
Yes.
And this is affecting people who are the actual anti-establishmentarians, like the actual leftists, anti-capitalists. I mean, you look at the symbiotic relationship between the right wing and the alternative media, it makes sense because foundationally, they agree, right, on capitalism. I mean, there's no differentiation on like that core policy. And so it works beautifully. But when you look at the left and people who are critical of the system, yeah, I mean, we're going to be boxed out forever, Taylor. And it's really unfortunate because, like you said, there are no systems in place that allow us to express ourselves freely without that worry every day going online. Will my YouTube channel still be around? Will my Twitter account still be there? We're living under the dictates and whims of these tech overlords. And it's absolutely not a partisan issue.
No, I mean, I think what's ironic is too, is just like liberals believe that if they could just censor enough conservative content, the internet would be safe and good. And then conservatives just believe if they could just censor enough sort of liberal and progressive content, then they could have the internet of their dreams or whatever. And nobody is protecting civil liberties. Nobody is actually protecting speech. Look at how literally just this week, there's talk of reviving the Kids Online Safety Act, a broad-based, incredibly dangerous, so insanely harmful censorship bill that is, being pushed under the guise of protecting children. What is it actually going to do? It's going to push these platforms to censor things like LGBTQ content, reproductive justice information, anything like that. So, and who's boosting it the most? It's people like Richard Blumenthal, right? Along with Republicans like Marsha Blackburn and others. But like, you see these politicians on both sides of the aisle come together to crack down on speech, because ultimately they do not want regular people, average people, working class people to amass power and influence online.
Right. And then you have all these right-wing mirrored platforms that are supposed to be these truth-telling platforms because of a result of this crackdown. But then it's just people apologizing for right-wing billionaires, pretending like this is partisan, and it's very disingenuous. There is this clear discrepancy, and I think it's widening, with people being able to amplify their own storytelling, their own voices through their social media when it comes to something like the genocide in Gaza, and that top-down narrative being dictated to us that really contradicts the reality that we see. And there's this crisis of legitimacy that continues to widen. I mean, it started for me during the Iraq War. I mean, with the Judith Miller, and it just seemed like there was no reckoning moment for these institutions, and there was certainly no changing them. And it just seems like we continue to see the same thing play out over and over again. And I don't know where it's going to go, but where do you see that schism going, especially with younger generations who have just written off these institutions entirely as untrustworthy?
They are untrustworthy. So I'm glad people are recognizing that they're untrustworthy, because again, you should not just universally trust any institution, right? Like, especially not when it comes to these billionaire-owned media conglomerates. You can trust individual reporters, as you mentioned, at places. Sometimes there's phenomenal reporting done by certain people. I think certain sections of these papers are better than other sections as well, depending on who's in charge of it. Certain editors are better. So I think it's just, I think the blind trust that a lot of people had for traditional media is gone. And I think that is actually a very good thing. But I do worry about journalism generally, because the media ecosystem is so broken. And when I talk to young people today, they're just so disillusioned that it's hard for them to, want to go into a dying industry. And then the only people that end up going into journalism sometimes, or not the only, but a significant portion of people that end up going into journalism are just really privileged people that they don't have to worry if they're only making $40,000 a year, or if they can just freelance because their income is subsidized. And those people are, again, never going to really understand the world as it is because they've grown up in such a bubble. And so that skews our media environment further. Yeah, it's really weird.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, you're totally right. I mean, I have so many people asking me at events, like, what do? I want to get into journalism. I want to tell these stories. And I think you and I both know you have to come from a place of a little bit of privilege, because so much is free work. I mean, I put in years of free work building up Media Roots
Same.
and all of my citizen journalism advocacy and self-teaching and how Premiere, you have to have that capacity in your life to be able to do that and invest time and energy. And people simply don't have that time. They don't have the capacity to do that because they're struggling as it is. And so you're already like siloing off the people who want to maybe get into this field and do due diligence with grassroots storytelling. And you're already basically telling those people that they can't do that.
Yeah, it's really hard. And there's no infrastructure. Like on the right, there is, as I wrote recently, like there is an infrastructure on the right to foster and develop talent, media talent, and their version of journalism, which is really just propaganda to defend powerful people and capitalism. But, they have things like, these training, the Daily Caller news program thing, or, fellowships. And they have like all of these ways to sort of get people with their ideological outlook into the traditional media. There's no infrastructure like that on the left. It just doesn't exist.
I guess what I'm most surprised of as someone who is a media critic across the board, I'm not partisan when it comes to my media analysis, but I'm really surprised at kind of this one-sided critique that has essentially become reflexive contrarianism against liberalism. This notion that the liberal media and the liberal establishment are somehow cartoonishly like all-powerful purveyors of the top-down control, like dictating this hegemony of culture. And let's just isolate the media. Just isolate the media. And you look at what is the landscape of media. Fox blows CNN and MSNBC out of the water. I mean, Fox basically takes 65% of viewer shares. And then you look at the top 10 live streamers. I mean, Hassan versus 9 conservatives.
Right.
Look at AM Talk Radio, all conservative. Almost all podcasts on like the top 10 Apple podcasts, all conservative. The top YouTubers, all conservative. What reality do you have to be living in to think that liberal media is the monolith that everyone is like listening to?
It's also, like you said, it's just like, it's so objectively false. Like you could literally just like look around and it's just nonsense. But this is the same thing that's like when they call like people like me or these other people, like it's like, oh, they're the real elites. Elon Musk isn't an elite. It's actually the reporter making $75,000 a year and in medical debt. She's the real elite. It's like, what are you talking about? Of course it's disingenuous because I feel like they must know that they're lying.
I mean, it's just so weird. And it's like, that's why this notion of conservative cultures, the new counterculture, conservatism, Christian nationalism, it's like, I'm sorry, what reality are you living in? Because even though, it's socially acceptable on TV and movies to have like feminists, Black lead characters, and like LGBTQ and non-conforming people, like, okay, I'll give you that Hollywood has made it like socially acceptable. That's a good thing. Look at every other center of power, institutionally, systemically in this country. Who owns the media industries? Who is in the political power? Who owns the courts? It's conservatives. It's conservatives across the board. So even though the CEO of Google, he paid lip service to the Muslim ban. He was out there protesting. You don't see them now protesting, do you? Because at the end of the day, capital accumulation is all that matters, whether or not you're maybe some pseudo-liberal CEO or conservative CEO. Yeah, maybe you differ on religious bigotry, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter if Trump's in office or if Kamala Harris is in office. And I think it's just so ludicrous to give conservatives even an inch to think that somehow, I just saw Glenn Beck being like, we're the cool kids now. It's like, no, dude, you guys fucking still own everything.
They just own
everything.
They just own and control everything.
Right.
They own and control everything. And they squash anybody. And then you have these people, I mean, what I've reported a lot on, which really bothers me too, is the cosplaying of independent media, where you have people like Barry Weiss accepting tens of millions of dollars in funding from billionaires to parrot billionaire pro-establishment talking points on a platform like Substack or whatever, right? Like they go on these like new platforms and then they say like, I'm independent media. It's like, you're not, how are you independent? You have the same funder. You're just corporate media in a different form. You're also backed by billionaires. You exist quite literally just to parrot talking points and to push an ideology that supports conservatives.
Oh my
So
God,
you're
how
not independent.
How embarrassing with the Twitter files that were just hand fed to people like Barry Weiss and
I was part of it. They did a Twitter files on me. And that was the one where Elon Musk was promoting the idea that I controlled the Internet Archive and my family owned the Internet Archive. And then the Internet Archive had to come out and be like, we have absolutely zero affiliation with her. Also, we're a nonprofit. Like no one controls us. And it was all based around the fact that like my tweets were excluded from the Internet Archive, which is literally something anyone can do. It says on their website. You just have to
my God.
click a button
Wait,
and email
that's
them.
how dumb Elon Musk is? Like, wait a
Yes.
minute. Holy shit.
They did this whole like quote unquote investigation and they got like, I mean, everything about it was wrong. It was just hilarious.
Who was the intrepid reporter that they hand fed
It
that
was
story
Paul
to?
Thacker, this guy Paul Thacker, who's also a quote unquote independent journalist, but really just pushes a bunch of like COVID denialism and crazy conspiracies about like woke, control of whatever. And
I mean, it was so fucking crazy because Elon's whole thing was like, I'm buying Twitter because of this government intrusion and I need to separate the government control of Twitter. It's like, dude, Twitter's way worse now. Like, oh God. It's like you have done exactly what you were criticizing before. Didn't he try to like take away your account because of the
He did.
Because
he
said
did. He
that you
permabanned
doxed,
me.
yeah.
And then now I'm on restricted mode on Twitter. So I don't have access to all the features of Twitter. Remember arbitrarily he banned me because I reported on a story about he had claimed that like somebody tried to assault him or something. And basically it happened in Glendale. And I went to the actual gas station and got the footage of the alleged assault. Turns out his person assaulted this other. It was like complete opposite of what he had said. It was like his security guard was like
fleeing?
tried to run someone
like,
over or something.
He was like justifying why he had to like take down, like, because he was like scared for his life or something.
Right,
he was like pretending
exactly.
like it was
like
some
the
crazy
jet
thing.
And it was like actually this. Not only did this person not track you through your jet, but like it sounds like you kind of tried to harm them. But it was anyway. So I reported that story. I posted it. Of course, my account gets banned, and then then he was forced to let me and a bunch of other journalists back on, but I'm on a heavily restricted mode. That's why I moved to YouTube and other platforms.
I mean, it's so crazy that Elon Musk is essentially like our shadow president. And I think that not enough people are talking about the enormous influence this monster has. I mean, not just buying the public square, but being in Trump's ear, investing over $100 million of his own money into this super PAC. I mean, I remember on election night, I was texting you like, holy shit, is this really happening? Like, is this really happening? And you were like, yeah, I thought the Democrats were going to pull it off. And to a certain extent, I did too.
I really did.
Because how could they be so fucking out of touch?
You know what's so funny? I covered the 2016 election, and this is back when I had a Snapchat show for The Hill. And I was at the Hilton the night that Trump won, and it was very crazy because most reporters did not get credentialed. They actually thought Hillary was going to win. That was one election I was like 100% Trump's winning. And then, I guess because they were able to pull it off with Biden, I was just like, somehow I feel like they're just going to do it again, where they're just going to like gaslight people into voting for them. They're just going to pull it off. People are too sick of Trump. And no, they really didn't. And the Democrats ran such an astonishingly bad campaign.
I mean, I remember in 2016 in New York too, and I was covering the election, and I remember it was like this huge, shocking thing. And then, so it's just funny that here we are this long after that. And I still thought like, there has to be some sort of internal polling that shows that they don't need to like court these voters. It's like
that's what I would have assumed. And then it turns out, no, it was actually telling them the opposite. And I was like, oh no, that's right. They don't care about winning. They actually don't care about winning. They just care about making money and preserving, the entire sort of DNC fundraising machine. It feels like.
Oh my God. And I just read that horrific article from Current Affairs. It was a great article, but it was like horrifically exposed. It really was just like a cash cow. It was totally just grifting. Let's just steal hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, what, like $1 billion? And they just squandered every cent. I mean, paying $100,000 for that fake podcast, the $250,000 like big sphere in Vegas, which is owned by a Trump guy. I mean,
It's hilarious, but it's like it's the arrogance that these people have. And they don't have, I mean, this is the problem with like the Democratic Party generally, is like they are just not aligned with the most people in America. It's a party that has been completely sort of captured by elite interests. And I mean, I saw this firsthand at the DNC. I was there covering it, and they like threw out Hassan Piker, revoked his credentials right after he interviewed a bunch of people from the uncommitted movement. Like they were blacklisting, content creators who were talking about climate, Gaza, COVID, so many, so anything that sort of challenged the Democratic narrative on things. And that's not a way to win.
Why do you think they did that so counterintuitively, knowing that even if they just put up the uncommitted leader who was going to endorse Kamala, who was going to urge Arab voters and Muslim voters and Palestinians to vote for her, and they still couldn't even do that, Taylor? Why?
Because they don't, this is what I mean. I don't think they care about winning. I think they care about sort of like they would rather lose and have Trump in power than cede even the smallest amount to the left or to make people feel hurt. I don't know. I mean, the Gaza stuff has been crazy because I think so many of them are just completely in the pocket of, groups, politically driven groups affiliated with like, the AIPAC stuff is really weird. Like, I don't know. I don't know, because you would think that they want to win.
I mean, the thing,
but I guess they
AIPAC,
just don't want to piss off their the mouth that feeds, or whatever. You don't want to bite the hand that feeds you, right? If you're getting millions of dollars from certain groups, you're going to cater to them.
Well, I keep remembering Marco Rubio at that town hall with the Parkland survivors, and they were talking about, will you stop taking money from the NRA? And he was just like, you have this all wrong. He was like, the NRA buys into my agenda. I don't support guns because I'm paid to. And I keep thinking of that. Like, even if AIPAC I think AIPAC is a horrific institution. It should be registered under FARA. And the fact that it's not so much as you pay politicians and then they support Israel. I think it's more the scare factor of like being terrified that they're going to like primary you, or
exactly.
It could be other issues too, but it's so much power. It's like we've subsidized Israel to such a ridiculous degree that now you have this lobby that's just undermining like free speech and civil liberties in this country. And it's just like, how is this even happening? But yeah, it's always that question, like what is going on? How are these politicians so beholden to corporations or something like Israel? And I don't know. I mean, my only explanation is like they're true believers and they've been captured well before getting into the political arena. I mean, to run for fucking Congress, you have to be kind of like a maniac anyway because of what you need to do. Like you need to be on the phone with donors and lobbyists like 24/7. And that's crazy. I mean, that doesn't sound fun.
No, I think also a lot of people get into politics because they want power, and that's not a really good like sort of filtering mechanism for elected officials.
What woke you up about Gaza, about Palestine? I was really pleasantly surprised to see that you started following me and liking some of the content on Palestine. Was there something that activated that in the last year for you?
No, I always had thoughts on that kind of. I'm not really, I don't cover foreign policy. But my very good friends with Ken Klippenstein. I don't know if you know who he is, but he's like an independent journalist too, on Substack now. But I don't know. He when we were covering the TikTok ban stuff, I talked to Ken a lot about speech, and he and a bunch of others did reporting on sort of like the motivations for banning TikTok and how, and this ended up in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, which confirmed this as well. Like what Rep. Gallagher really was able to resell the TikTok ban through was by saying, like, look at these young people speaking out on behalf, pro-Gaza. Like, look at, like, we need to silence his speech. And my colleague, again, at the Washington Post, Drew Harwell, had done this phenomenal piece sort of debunking these narratives that it was TikTok that was radicalizing young people. And actually, this is just like young people being more educated about sort of the situation. And this has been decades in the making. So I just kind of realized that, like, the media coverage of it was really skewed. And I thought that was crazy. I'm very anti-war generally. Obviously, not obviously, but I, when Obama was in office and I was on Tumblr, I made Tumblr's I just was really critical of like the drone strike stuff.
Well, I love that you called Biden's ass out as a war criminal.
Yeah.
Because he absolutely fucking is, man. And
he's a war criminal. And by the way, I think actually every politician, like every every president in my lifetime is a war criminal.
Right.
I really believe that. Like, I really have thought about it, and I'm like, it's disgusting. And and Biden more than anyone. I mean, it's evil. And I know all these content creators in Gaza because I ended up reporting on a lot of it and stuff. And yeah, I mean, I've just learned so much from them because they're not even content creators. These are journalists, right? That are doing this. And I think seeing the hypocrisy of the press and the way that the press talks about like press freedom. And, I've been to like the White House Correspondents' Dinner and all this stuff and protect journalists. And then the silence as hundreds of Gazan journalists are slaughtered in cold blood, complete silence. Like it's so fucking hypocritical.
How do you explain that? I mean, I seriously can't explain that because for me, it's like when the profession is under attack, it's like there should be solidarity. It's like the Hippocratic Oath of doctors. It's like,
Right.
I don't care what your political beliefs are. Like, this is where solidarity needs to be on full display.
I know. I don't understand it other than I've realized that they don't consider certain journalists real journalists. And you kind of saw this with like the way they talk about like bloggers or people outside the mainstream media or whatever. But, they'll sort of acknowledge when someone worked for Al Jazeera because it's like a big enough news organization. But, if these other journalists are affiliated with smaller news organizations or they're just independent journalists, like they're just written off. And I don't know. I mean, they're obviously doing some of the best journalism in the world right now. I think those journalists on the ground covering their own demise, like those are the people that should be winning Pulitzers. I don't know. I feel like they're embodying the essence of what journalism should be. But the traditional press is just, it's very like, I mean, even who they award, like the whole awards thing is also very like biased, and it's all just like skewed towards certain types of journalism and certain types of people. But it's just gross. I don't know. It's really gross.
Yeah, the self-congratulatory like award shows and spectacles, and then they try to actually rescind that Emmy nomination for Bisson.
Yes.
I mean,
but you just see like
woman.
you see these power structures and like the way they're weaponized against people. I mean, I live in LA, so I have friends in entertainment, and like the way that they're silenced and threatened, for speaking out on things. And that's why I thought, I should use my platform, especially now that I'm independent, to talk about things that other people don't have the privilege to be able to talk about, right? Because unfortunately they work for some company that would fire them if they said it.
To be able to, like, as someone who's a leftist and who has critiqued the deep state, for example, like that notion of this kind of unchanging body that surpasses or transcends, obviously, like political parties, like that's a thing. And so to have that weaponized and hijacked and folded into like right-wing partisan politics is genius. And not enough people, I think, are talking about that and what that has done for Trump to kind of secure like victory. I mean, the Joe Rogans is another thing, but I think the fact that like the Alex Jones audience was given permission, like this guy's on your side, even though we already had him for 4 years, we know that he's not a fucking he's going to just do whatever the CIA wants. Like he expanded the empire, but it doesn't matter. And I think there's something to be said psychologically about capturing so many subcultures.
Yes.
I don't know how he did it or how that was so successful, but it's really upsetting because I feel like I can't talk about certain issues without being now branded as like a Trump person. When I just say the term, the deep state, it's like already you're just in that camp.
Well, it's like,
or for example, weaponizing the term fake news, like of real distrust in the corporate media. And he was able to fold that all into like partisanship.
Yeah. I mean, you see this a lot around health too, right? Like suddenly like the sort of wellness world. I was talking to a friend who's an environmental reporter who was sort of complaining about this because she does, phenomenal reporting on, the very real like environmental abuses of corporations, right? That are poisoning our environment and putting, microplastics. Again, Sean Morrow, another journalist, did a great thing recently on these companies just dumping stuff into our water supply. But if you try to talk about those things, it's like, it's very coded as kind of like liberals have written it off almost. And it comes coded as right-leaning now in this way where it's like actually environmental activism and health and wellness that used to have left-leaning connotations. It used to be like granola hippie, like crunchy lifestyle was like seen as progressive. And now like just that entire world has been sold this very individualistic view of health and wellness, and it's completely co-opted by the right. Oh my gosh, I was looking for a pan. I was looking for the best stainless steel pan that doesn't have any sort of like PFAs or whatever like stuff. And I was on this website. It was like, I realized it was a right-wing blog basically, but it's like the only place that I could find, like, it's just weird how these things emerge where you're like, why am I like on here? How did the right like come to own this like weird niche, but it's strategic.
And going back to like the discontent and distrust of the corporate media, I mean, this is the result of that, Taylor. When you have people not believing anything that the establishment says, you're going to see things like what we saw under COVID. You're going to see people completely rejecting all the mass shootings as staged. It's like you can't accept what is happening, and you certainly aren't going to trust the purveyors of so-called truth. I mean, from ruling like billionaire-owned outlets who have lied to us about Iraq, about Gaza. It's like, so it's a huge crisis of
They've
truth.
lied about COVID. I mean, as somebody that's affected by it, like it's infuriating that there's no, and I just mean about the health effects. Like David Leonhardt at the New York Times was publishing even 3 years ago, grossly false medical misinformation, health misinformation, lying to people about airborne disease mitigation, lying to people about, the harms that COVID can do, the links between COVID and heart attacks and things like that. And then it's terrible. And then of course people don't trust, so they turn to these alternative news sources, and those alternative news sources are often unreliable too. And I just think broadly, people don't have a lot of media literacy in this country generally, right? Like most people don't have time to even evaluate like sources. They just sort of see something online and believe it or accept it, or it fits with their worldview. And so they sort of are like, okay, that checks out. And it's very dangerous. It's keeping the focus on like who's challenging power, right? If you're reading something that is owned by a billionaire, I think that's something you should take into account, right? If you're following somebody who is independent, I mean, it's like, look at the funding of things, look at who's supportive of things, like look at, what is the goal of this like news outlet that you're reading? Is the goal, again, is it funded by billionaires? Is it like, does it exist to prop up a specific ideology? I don't know. These are all really hard things. You can't like just teach media literacy. It's something that we need to teach in schools. And of course, conservatives have dismantled public education and we can't teach those things in schools. So
I want to move on to another reason why you are legendary, and that is because you expose the identity of the woman behind the notorious Libs of TikTok account, Chaya Raichik. When you did this, I mean, she was already a powerful influencer. She was working basically to expose random people to harassment campaigns, trolling, doxing, for being proud, open, non-binary, non-gender conforming LGBTQ people. And it was just horrifying what she was doing. Talk about why you wanted to expose her and what happened to you as a result.
Yeah, this is a woman. So I cover online influence, obviously. I write about content creators and people that are amassing sort of online followings. What I had noticed, this was like 2 summers ago. I think it was summer. I can't remember. It was like several months before I think it was that summer. I can't remember how many years ago this was, 2 or 3 summers ago, is when I started to notice her. I think it was like that August that Joe Rogan started to mention her. She kind of came out of nowhere, and she had maybe tens of thousands of followers, but she was getting boosted by a lot of big right-wing figures. And then also she was sort of acting as this de facto assignment editor for all of Fox News. So you could trace, and I made this whole like sort of spreadsheet because I was tracking for a while of like, here she tweets something, here you see it on Tucker Carlson the next day. Here she tweets something, here you see it on, another Fox News the next day. So it was she was clearly like driving the right-wing media in an interesting way. Then I also heard that she had gotten millions of dollars in funding, which ultimately was confirmed, from Seth Dillon, the Babylon Bee co-founder. And then I still was like, because I had to sort of make the case to my editor of like why this was valuable and why we should expose her identity. She also, Christine Pushaw, Ron DeSantis' press secretary, had basically cited her as informing the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida. So I was like, okay, here is a anonymous influencer account on Twitter that is quite literally shaping the media, the right-wing media, getting boosted, getting millions of dollars of funding which we don't know where this funding is going, we need to be able to scrutinize these businesses that are affecting our discourse and is influencing state level legislation with no oversight and no accountability. And we don't, no discussion of like, who is this person? Are they even an American citizen? Like, what is their background? What are their goals? So I felt like it was really important to figure out who was behind the account. Ultimately I did that. I tracked her down to her house, and then I went down and knocked on her door because she wasn't responding to my phone calls. I was calling her for requests for comment. She wasn't responding. And so again, something journalists will do is you really do have to try, especially if you're going to expose someone's identity on the internet, to get comment from them. So I famously knocked on her door to get comment. She didn't respond at all, but I could see her bookshelf, which was hilariously full of like just crazy right-wing books. And then Glenn Greenwald tweeted out, "Taylor Lorenz won't stop harassing Chaya Raichik. Here she is on her doorstep." And that was very funny because it was all the confirmation that we needed. Basically, he confirmed it and made it publishable.
Wait a minute. So Chaya was contacting Glenn saying what was happening real time?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. So he ended up tweeting. I knew it was her. I knew that she lived there. But my editors were still like a little bit nervous about it. And like we had written it in a way that like couched it just slightly more. And then when Glenn tweeted that out, it was like 100% confirmation that it was her. So I just was like, okay, like then I can say everything that I found on her because this is definitely her. Yeah, which is very funny. I know.
mean, did you just get subjected to just a tirade of harassment after that? Like what was your life like?
Yeah, it was really funny. Also, like Glenn is an interesting figure because I think like he's been really good on certain things, and then certain things he like defends like these evil billionaires and people like libs of TikTok, which I'm just like, I have no idea why you're simping for this woman, but whatever. But yeah, so I mean, she was very obviously outraged that I had like exposed her. I knew that she would get a boost in following because she would claim like cancel culture and stuff, but I felt like it was really important to expose who she was again, so that the other journalists could do more critical reporting, so people could dig into her background, and so that there was some level of accountability for the things she was doing. She couldn't operate in the shadows. So yeah, I mean, obviously same rigmarole. Like I've gone through this cycle so many times. I was doxxed. My family members were swatted. Everyone was harassing, it was like one of these cycles I've been through so many times of just like relentless abuse, crazy, other media people saying like I'm unethical and evil for reporting on someone because like how, she deserves her privacy or something. It's like, yeah, you deserve privacy if you're just a regular citizen, not if you're directly impacting state legislation and the media and taking millions of dollars in funding to run a media empire. Then we should scrutinize you. So,
well, and then you did this sit down with her face to face. I mean, it must have been very rewarding to just have a conversation with her and realize how fucking dumb she is. I was shocked. I mean, I guess shocked is
so dumb.
A little bit exaggerated, but like there was no substance at all. Like within the first minute, she like you were just like earnestly like unpacking all of the craziness because it's just like, okay, you reveal how insane you are and how stupid you are. Like let's go. Within 1.5 minutes of that interview, her talking about how children are lopping off their genitalia. I mean, she's referring to children getting transitional surgery, which is literally like doesn't exist in this country, which you called her out on. I mean, all these people have our straw men.
Yes, they just make things up. My favorite part of the whole interview is when I asked her to name a single material harm that trans people had caused, just one harm to the world. And she couldn't name a single harm to the world. I'm like, your entire platform is built on this. Your entire platform. I wrote this like 2,500 word sort of deep story into the impact that she was having in the Oklahoma school system and the cruelty and the impact that it's had on LGBTQ youth in the state. And in order to get comment from her for that story, I reached out and I said like, hey, can I get comment for this story? She blew me off. She said a bunch of weird sarcastic stuff. She always sends me weird sexual message. Like there's always some weird undertone. It's bizarre. It's like, she's like, I know you want to date me or something. I'm just like, I'm actually just trying to get story. Yeah. So then she goes, I'll give you comment in person. And I was like, oh, please. Because we're both in LA. So, yeah. And then she immediately tried to back out of it. And then I was like, no. Like you said that. So she agreed to give me 5 minutes. And it was just very clear from the jump that she couldn't control the interview. She had no experience. And I think she thought that I was going to be this like version of me that the right-wing media paints me as, which is like some like, oh my God, like I'm going to cry if you're not, if you say the wrong thing or I don't know, like I'm some like liberal, like, weird person. So she shows up wearing a t-shirt with my face on it, which she just like never acknowledged, which was so funny. And I never brought it up. And she just like she just like wore it and like didn't say anything about it. I was like, wow, you're so unprepared for this. And then obviously like I'm severely immunocompromised. So I have to be very, very careful. I obviously wear a mask everywhere. And so, yeah, she showed up with a box of masks and she's like, oh, do you want a mask? And I was like, no, thanks. I already have
you're like,
one.
I got one. Thanks.
And then she just like quietly puts it back into her bag. And like, I'm just like, having dealt with other people like Jacob Wohl or like some of these right-wing figures, like they're insane, but they're like there to get the clip, right? Like they're there to get the content. They know to like just antagonize you, to fluster you. Like she couldn't articulate a single thought. It was just so disturbing that someone like that. But it just shows that like these influencers on the right, like they're just puppets. They're puppets for billionaire interests and fascist causes that prop these people up because they're useful idiots.
Well, as she said, some cultures are better than others. Not all cultures
and she's racist as fuck.
are equal. Holy shit. And then like within the first minute too, she's like, I've never known an LGBTQ person. It's just like, well, wrap it up. You're like, you're insane. You're a horrible person. It's just like, okay, well then there you go. I mean, God, your whole life is just being terrified of people that you don't even know.
Yes. She's just incredibly ignorant. And yeah, but it's, of course, she's getting showered with millions of dollars because if you say the right thing, if you tell rich, powerful, evil people in this country what they want to hear, they will shower you with money. And that is
Hold on, what were they even paying her millions of dollars for? Just to like run
to
Twitter
post full time because she was a real estate agent. Yeah, she was a real estate agent. And so they started giving, like Seth Dillon gave her millions of dollars literally just to, and she still gets funding from various people, but to post full time and run her little news organization.
He could have invested that into better writers for the Babylon Bee. I mean, to make it funny. Oh my God.
But
here's the thing about
these
right wingers. They just go for the low hanging fruit. It's the shock factor of like trans athletes and kids and or the bathroom thing. And it's all distraction from their simmering hatred of just LGBTQ people in general, gender nonconforming people in general, plain and simple. Because if Chaya Raichik did this 20 years ago, she would be out there. She would be one of the people out there basically blaming AIDS on promiscuous gay guys. Like she would be one of those people who would just be like
I think she would do that
AIDS
today.
denier. Yeah, right.
She's like that. She's a COVID denier. Like the ideology is the same across, decades. Like it is an ideology of hate and bigotry and it's terrible.
Well, that's what's so funny about people like Dave Rubin, like the good gay guys, like in the eyes of the right wing. It's like, I'm doing everything that you want me to, like, will you accept me now? And so people like Dave Rubin going to bat for libs of TikTok and things like that. But then you see him sit down with someone like Ben Shapiro and he's like, I play ball, like I'm a right winger just like you. And Ben Shapiro's even just like, you're going to hell. Like, I don't accept you. I mean, it's like, what do these people think is going to happen? Do they think that they're accepted in the club?
Yes. Well, people just they always, look, marginalized people throughout history, right? Like some certain amount of people will believe that if they align themselves with their oppressors, that will somehow protect them. It's not true. You're just going to be thrown under the bus along with everyone else. Your proximity to power won't protect you in those moments because those people, like you said, fundamentally, they don't believe you should exist, or they don't support you. They don't actually have your interests at heart. And so it doesn't protect you. It might protect you for a little bit, but in the long run, you're selling out your own people for a little bit more proximity to power. It's like the trad wife mentality, or it's like, again, saying, yes, you're right. Like women should be led by men. It's that girl, Pearl Davis or whatever. Mm-hmm. Is that her last name? On Twitter, like, it's pitiful because they don't respect you. Like these people, they don't have your interest at heart. So you might
Yeah,
as
and
well stand up for them.
the only reason that you're even viral or famous is because of your utility for the right wing. It's like they'll point to you and be like, "Oh, even this woman agrees with me."
Yeah.
You know, or even Dave Rubin agrees with me, or Tim Pool, the liberal, agrees with me. It's like that's the only reason why they care about you. The only reason that you're important to them.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, as much as I want to think these people are total pariahs and irrelevant, I think that we both know that they certainly are not irrelevant, Taylor. You know, in fact, much of Trump's cabinet is just stacked to the brim with these anti-woke crusaders, really terrifying. I mean, the fact that they're like going on this policy. I mean, they're basically saying one of the policy platforms is ending woke culture. I don't know what the hell that means. I can assume it just means book banning, like cracking down on trans healthcare. But what's so crazy to me is like you and I mean, we came from, you know, the internet world like a long time ago. I think that we're like around the same age. So it's like crazy to see all of these like lunatics like Laura Loomer, you know, all these people who were like on the edges of even internet culture like a few years ago are now like mainstreamed. I mean, the fact that she was like parading around with Trump. And so all of these people, all the agendas that seemed like just online rage click farming, like rage farming shit, that were just super manufactured hysterical things like the trans kids and the bathroom thing. Like these are now going to be national policies. And I think that's what's so disturbing to me.
It's so scary. I'm really concerned. And there's no like opposition to it. Like we've seen with that bill, like criminalizing nonprofits that so many Democrats voted for. Like, I just think liberals will go along with fascism all the way, you know, at the end of the day. And there's no real opposition to what a lot of these people in Trump's sort of orbit want to accomplish. And it's concerning.